Welcome back to the Aubergine Chef. Now today we'll be making something called Piña Colada cake, which was a cake that I designed for a project in class. I never actually made it. It was one of those class projects where you just design the cake and it's optional to make it if we had more time in the year, and you know how things go in the kitchen. There's never any extra time to do any extra projects. So I kind of just put it on the shelf and kind of collected dust after a while. But sometime during my junior or senior year, after I made the recipe, my friend Katie at Katie Cakes Cakery. She's one of the people I go to for a lot of my cake questions, and there's a couple links to her site on my website. My friend at Katie Cakes Cakery and her mother wanted to make a piña colada cake, so she asked me for my recipe, and they ended up making it and telling me that it was actually a really good recipe. So I've been meaning to make it ever since she told me that, obviously like 6 years later, coming around to making it. But I'm really happy to be sharing this recipe with you. It's not super unique in that I'm using different recipes from school, but they are many of them are altered, so I guess it is unique in that kind of sense. So here is another Aubergine Chef unique recipe. So the first thing you need to do is we're going to make the piña colada cake itself, so the vanilla coconut genoise, and you need to prepare 2 9-inch cake pans. Just grease it with some pan release. Put a little piece of parchment paper right in the middle. You don't have to have it on the entire circle, because as long as it doesn't stick in the middle, it'll release. And then grease the paper again. Go ahead and set these aside until we need them. You also need to have, 1 pound or 8 whole eggs. You need to put this in a metal bowl that you can use for your double boiler. Luckily, my mixer bowl works really well for my double boiler, and I'll show you what I mean by double boiler if you've never heard of that term before. In this bowl, I have 5.5 ounces of all-purpose flour and 4 ounces of cornstarch sifted together. I also have 7 3/4 ounces of shredded coconut. I use this unsweetened and sweetened blend, so about I'd say about 3/4 of it is unsweetened and 1/4 of it is sweetened, but you feel free to use whatever blend you want if you want to use all sweetened or if you want to use all unsweetened. Just be aware that the major difference is just the amount of sugar that's added into the shredded coconut. I also have 9 3/4 ounces of granulated sugar, which we're going to add to our eggs. And in this bowl, I have 4 ounces of melted and cooled unsalted butter. And I've also added a pinch of salt, just a teaspoon of vanilla extract, and 1/2 cup or 4 ounces of coconut milk or coconut cream. And you can usually find coconut milk in the international aisle if you can't find it in the canned milk or dry milk aisle. And then what you want to do is you want to take all those ingredients and just kind of whisk them together until eventually they form this kind of like light milky looking substance. So now that we've gone over all of our ingredients and you've got them all weighed out, we can go ahead and add our granulated sugar to our whole eggs. And we just want to get that started. We want to break up all the yolks and get them all mixed together. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come over to the double boiler. Okay, so the name of a double boiler can be a little misleading because we don't really want to have boiling water because we don't want to accidentally cook our eggs too fast. So we're just going to have gently simmering water. I want to go ahead and mix all that sugar real well with our eggs because the egg yolks can chemically cook from the granulated sugar, make them all hard and gnarly, and you don't want to have something like that. So what we're doing is we want to warm this up to about 120 to 125 degrees Fahrenheit, and all we're doing is gently stirring the eggs just to make sure the temperature gets heated up evenly. And the reason we do this is it helps get rid of some of the water that's in the eggs. It helps make the eggs a little bit stronger for our cake, for folding it in. Usually you do this with Swiss buttercream. It makes a really nice buttercream when you have very strong eggs with a lot of the water evaporated out of it. But the same can be true for our cake. And if you noticed, our cake doesn't really have any baking powder or baking soda in it. So it's going to rely a lot on the air that's going to be trapped in our eggs. So when we whip up our eggs, we want to make sure they're good and strong so that the air cells that they create are nice and strong and plentiful. So that way when we bake our cake, they get nice and light and fluffy, just like a cake should be. You're not really trying to beat in too much air right now. You just want to just gently stir it. All right, now that our eggs are all heated up, we can go ahead and whip them up. And we're going to go by something called ribbon stage, which is something you usually see when you're making a pâte à bombe with just egg yolks. and I'll show you what that looks like. And it could take a while to get to that stage, so I'll show you. Okay, so as you can see, our eggs whipped up quite a bit. We've got a lot of volume in our egg and sugar mixture. And so I'll show you what I mean by the ribbon stage method, or I think it's also called the track method. Like you can draw a track in your eggs, and it takes about 5 to 7 seconds for it to come back together. I like to usually just like drop it on top of each other and see as it piles on top of each other, the ribbons pile on top of each other. It takes a while for them to get mixed right back into the rest of the eggs. The ribbon stage makes a little bit more sense with egg yolks because it does fall a little bit more like ribbons. This is very, it kind of has a very ploppy kind of look to it. But the same idea still applies. You're looking for whatever you put on top to take about 5 to 7 seconds or more before it is absorbed back into the mixture. You don't want to accidentally over whip your egg either, because then you'll just have this it'll start to separate and look grainy. And you want to make sure that they're nice and whipped up because you want to have as many air cells as you can in there. Alright, so next we're going to fold in the remainder of our ingredients. So we can go ahead and combine, the coconut and the flour and cornstarch, kind of just gently stir them together. And we'll put about half of that mixture into our eggs. And we're just going to gently fold it in. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to mix the ingredients together without losing a ton of air cells. Now it's inevitable. We are going to lose a bunch of them. But we're going to try and do our best. If we were to do this on a mixer, this would just lose all the air cells. That's why we have to fold it in by hand. Alright, so before all the flour and coconut are mixed in, we can go ahead and add in a little bit of our coconut milk or cream, melted butter, a pinch of salt, and the vanilla extract mixture. Add in about a half of it, and we'll fold that in as well. Now if you have a friend that can help you and slowly drizzle it in while you're folding it, that's a big help too, because you actually lose a little bit of air cells, a little bit more air cells the way that I'm doing it, rather than having a friend slowly drizzle it in. So we'll go ahead and just pour them into our prepared cake pans, and this actually might be a lot more batter than we need because it's really light. So fill your cake pan about 3/4 of the way up, or half of the way up. Yeah, it actually makes 3 layers, so I'm going to go ahead and get that ready. So like I said, it actually ended up making about 3 9-inch layers. So what I'll do is I'll make the changes on my website, or on the recipe that you can download from my website, www.theauberginechef.com. I'll go ahead and reduce the recipe by about a third, 33%, and that way with the recipe you have will make exactly 2 9-inch cakes. It's just that there's so much volume in this recipe, it's very difficult to tell how many cakes it's going to make in the end if you go solely by weight. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and bake these cake layers at 350 degrees on the middle rack with a sheet pan. On the 4th rack below it, an empty sheet pan, so that way it helps balance out the temperature in the oven so they don't get burned to the bottom. And we'll just go ahead and bake them for about 35 to 45 minutes until they test done. And to test done is you want to just insert a toothpick or knife into the center of the cake. If the toothpick comes out clean, then your cake is done. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and make the pineapple filling. Now, one of the ingredients in the pineapple filling is fresh pineapple, but you can use canned pineapple if you want to skip this step, if you don't feel comfortable cutting up a pineapple, and you're going to have a lot left over. Now, the only reason I really recommend using a fresh pineapple is because we're going to be using pineapple juice, which isn't so fresh. So the fresh pineapple is going to give it a really nice fresh flavor. But feel free to use canned pineapple if you want. Just make sure to drain out any of the juice or replace the juice in the recipe with the juice in the can. Just make sure that it's juice and not like syrup or water or anything like that. So to begin, one of the first things you want to do is you want to twist off and get a grip on the pineapple. Twist off the top, and it comes right off. Then the next thing you want to do is cut off the ends. And that gives you a nice flat surface to work on. And then the next step you want to do is you want to shave off all of the skin or the rind, whatever you want to call it. And it might take a couple times going around. Usually the first piece gives you a chance so you can see where the skin is on the next piece. And you kind of want to go in the shape of the pineapple. You don't want to just go straight up and down because then you're going to be losing a lot of the pineapple. And when you're buying a pineapple, one of the things you want to look for a fresh pineapple is that it's nice and golden yellow. This one's actually kind of green. I had a hard time finding a fresh pineapple, and I actually bought it like a week in advance, and it didn't really ripen too much for me. So just keep that in mind, that you're looking for a nice yellow pineapple. Sometimes international supermarkets will have fresher tropical fruit than regular commercial grocery stores. So once you get all the skin off, then the next thing you want to do is shave off all those eyes. That's kind of like the remnants of the skin and stuff like that. And you just want to keep going back and shaving off more and more of it. Be careful not to cut off too much of the flesh, because like I said, you don't want to waste too much of it. Alright, so next you want to cut your pineapple into 4. So using the core as the center of your pineapple, cut it in half. And then if you can see, the pineapple has a core right here in the center of the pineapple. So you want to cut down the middle of that as well. So in case you didn't cut your pineapple perfectly in half, you really want to use that core as a guide, so that way all your pieces are about the same size. Not super important in this case because we're going to be cutting it up pretty small, but like if you're doing a fruit tart or whatnot, you want to make sure that you have all equal pieces. So after that, all you have to do is cut out the core. And then you have a ready-to-use pineapple wedge for however you want to do it. Now for us, we're going to need to have it diced up into pretty small pieces. And you probably don't want your pieces too long, so you might want to cut some of these longer pieces in half, and you should look for pieces about this size. So I'm going to go ahead and finish cutting up my pineapple. Okay, so my cake layers actually came out of the oven a little bit early, so I'd actually recommend checking your cakes about 30 minutes in, because it seems that they bake a little bit quick. One of the ones towards the back of the oven actually got a little bit overbaked, so it's a good thing I have 2 extra layers. But other than that, they came out pretty good. So after you've cut up your pineapple, we can go ahead and finish measuring out the ingredients for our pineapple filling. I have 4 ounces of granulated sugar and 1.5 ounces of all-purpose flour in this bowl so far, as well as a pinch of salt. We'll go ahead and add in our diced pineapple. I have about 1 cup here, nice full cup, which is going to come out to be about 6 ounces. Alright, and we're also going to add 6 ounces of pineapple juice. You can use a canned one or one you find in a jar. Kind of just get those mixed together. And 1 whole egg. You also want to have, let's see, a tablespoon or half an ounce of butter sitting to the side, which we're going to add in towards the end. So we're just going to continuously stir this together until everything is nice and thickened. The reason we're doing it in a double boiler, you could do this in a pot, just a regular pot, but the flour has a tendency to burn a little bit. I don't know if you've ever made gravy. It burns pretty quickly, so a double boiler helps make sure that it doesn't burn. But if you're in a rush, feel free to do it in the pot. As long as you're careful, it should work pretty well. Okay, so once your filling gets pretty thick like this, you want to cook it for about a minute or 2 longer, just to make sure to get all that starchy flavor out of the filling from the flour. And then what you want to do is you want to cover it with plastic wrap right to the surface and put it into the refrigerator to cool off while you finish making the buttercream. And actually, there's one more thing we need to do before we cover it up. We need to add in the tablespoon of butter, unsalted butter, right into our hot pineapple filling, and go ahead and stir that in. It's going to add flavor and shine. Alright, so remember, cover this with plastic wrap right to the surface, put it in the refrigerator, and we'll go ahead and make our coconut buttercream. Alright, so we're going to make the light and airy coconut Swiss buttercream. Now this version of Swiss buttercream has less butter in it, so it's actually really, really light and very airy. It's almost got like a melt in your mouth, kind of like cotton candy, almost not even there kind of feel to it. It's really kind of cool, and it's great if you don't have the amount of butter you usually need for Swiss buttercream, which is actually quite a bit. So one of the first things you need to do is you need to separate your eggs, and because we have a filling in this cake, we can use a little bit less egg whites, so that's kind of nice as well, makes it a little bit less expensive. So all we really need is 5 egg whites. So to separate an egg white, or to separate an egg, crack your egg open gently, allow the egg white to fall out, and just kind of pass the egg yolk back and forth a couple times, allowing more of the egg white to drip down. Now remember that since we're making a buttercream, we need to have a meringue. And the best way to get light and airy meringues is to make sure that our mixer bowl, which actually happens to be my double boiler as well, and the electric whip, the attachment for the mixer, the whip, both of them have been wiped with a little bit of vinegar, a paper towel dampened with a little bit of vinegar. And what that does is it cleans off any fat residue that's still remaining on the bowl and the whip, because any fat, including egg yolks, can inhibit the whipping of the egg whites, which means less volume or no volume at all. So keep that in mind. If you get a little bit of egg yolk in here, you got to do your best to get it out, because if you don't, it could prevent your egg whites from whipping up. Okay, let me go over the rest of my ingredients. I have 5 ounces of granulated sugar, which I'm going to add directly to the egg whites and put onto a double boiler. I also have, in this measuring cup, 2 ounces of the coconut milk that I used before, same coconut milk or coconut cream, 1 1/4 ounces of coconut rum, like Malibu, and then I'm going to add, this is optional, if you can get your hands on it, it's Loran Oils, flavor oils. I'm going to use the coconut flavor oil. And I'm just going to use just 1/4 teaspoon, 1/8 teaspoon, very, very little. It's very concentrated, very strong. But like I said, it's optional. You don't need to use it. And you're also going to need 5 ounces of powdered sugar sifted. And I'm just going to sift it right into this bowl. So that way you can use fewer bowls. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the sugar to my egg whites and bring it over to my double boiler and cook it until it reaches about, or not cook it, but stir it gently and warm it up until it reaches about 120 to 125 degrees Fahrenheit. And I'm not really going to show you how to do that because we've been on a double boiler twice already. But when we come back, I'll go ahead and show you how to whip it up. We'll be on the mixer at that point. Alright, so my egg whites and my sugar, for 5 egg whites, 5 ounces of granulated sugar, have come to about 124 degrees Fahrenheit. So we can go ahead and start whipping it up. We can go ahead and whip this up to medium to stiff peaks. Okay, so once you've reached medium to stiff peaks with your egg whites, we can go ahead and add in the butter. Now remember, our butter is at room temperature. You can either achieve that by microwaving it little by little for about 10 to 30 seconds at a time, or you can just let it sit out at room temperature. And what we're going to do is we're just going to add it in a stick at a time. Mine's actually really soft, must be really warm in here. Which reminds me that when you're getting ready to make your icing and to ice your cake, you want to kind of turn up your air conditioning to, like, I don't know, 70 to 73 degrees, maybe lower if you can, hack it with your bill. Because a nice cool environment will help keep your buttercream nice and firm. Remember that buttercream gets most of its structure from the butter. So if it's really hot, like 80 to 100 degrees in your house, then you're going to have really soupy buttercream. So just keep that in mind. You can also use a refrigerator, going back in and out of the refrigerator to help you kind of maintain control of your buttercream. So I'm adding in 14 ounces of unsalted room temperature butter. And meanwhile, while this is all going on, I'm toasting some coconut. I'd say it's about 8 ounces, probably a good 4 cups. We're going to use it to decorate the outside of the cake. And I'm also cooking up some simple syrup. To do that, all you need to do is boil up equal parts of granulated sugar, water, a pinch of cream or tartar, just to bring it to a boil. And then you take it off the heat once it comes to a boil, let it cool off. I'm going to add a little bit of coconut rum to the simple syrup to give it a nice coconut flavor. And we're going to use that to add some moistness to the cakes that I slightly overbaked. But you can use it for cakes even if you didn't overbake it. It adds some nice sweetness and flavor and some moistness to your cakes. Okay, once you've added all your butter, if you need to, scrape in the sides of your bowl. Sometimes you don't need to when it comes to buttercream, but this time I do. Alright, and once our egg and butter mixture come together, we can go ahead and add in all of our powdered sugar. There's this 5 ounces of sifted powdered sugar. Go ahead and mix that on low. Get that incorporated in. Alright, once all your powdered sugar is incorporated, go ahead and on a little bit faster than low speed, but not quite as high as medium speed, you can go ahead and incorporate our coconut milk, our coconut rum, and our coconut flavoring if you decided to use it. Alright, so I'm going to refrigerate my buttercream for a little bit to let it set up a little bit more, get nice and firm before we start icing our cake. Don't forget you need to make your simple syrup and toast some coconut. To toast some coconut, you want to have your oven about 350 to 400 degrees with your coconut spread pretty thinly. And every 3 to 5 minutes you want to stir and mix your coconut to make sure that it's getting heated evenly, because the coconut on the outside closest to the edge of the sheet pan is going to brown a lot faster than stuff in the middle. So to release your cake, run a knife along the edge of the cake. Oops. Just to make sure it's not sticking to the sides at all. Then flip it over and it should pop right out. And if it doesn't, just give it a good whack on your table to help release it. And it should pop right out. Just like that. Depending on how your coconut settles, it depends if you lose a couple pieces here and there, but it's no big deal. Alright, so one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to trim our cake. And all we're doing is just taking off the top layer of the cake so that way our simple syrup can get into it. So just run your knife along the edge of the cake, starting at the lowest point, to kind of start drawing a line. Then once you meet it back up with that line, go ahead and start gently sawing into your cake. Remember that you might need to angle your knife downward. This isn't much of an exaggeration, but just slightly downward to compensate, because the cake's going to force your knife upward. And if it forces it upward and you're not countering it, you're going to end up with a dome in the center of your cake. So that takes some practice to get the feel for it, because it depends on the thickness, how dense the cake is, depends on how much you have to counteract. But you'll get the feel for it after you do a few cakes. Okay, take off the layer you just cut off. It's a pretty crumbly cake, so keep that in mind too. Alright, once you've cut both of your cake layers or trimmed off the top of them, go ahead and clean your work area of any crumbs. My chefs always used to say that if there were any crumbs on your table, that they would probably most likely get into your icing. It's almost inevitable. So clean up your surface as best you can, getting rid of as much of the crumbs as you can. Alright, so once you've cleaned your area of crumbs, you can go ahead and begin decorating your cake. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to soak our first or bottom layer with some coconut simple syrup. Remember, this is a 1-to-1 ratio of sugar and water brought to a boil with a little bit of coconut rum added to it, and a little bit of cream of tartar before we boil it. And the coconut rum you add after you brought it to a boil, because you don't want to evaporate off all that liquid. And then you want to make sure it's completely cool before you add it to your cake. And then in this piping bag, I have my light and airy coconut Swiss buttercream. And what we're going to do is we're just going to pipe a ring around the cake. I have it fitted with an 824 star tip because I'm going to use it later to make rosettes on the top of my cake. So instead of filling multiple piping bags, just going to use the same one because it doesn't matter how it looks in here. All we're really using this for is a barrier to make sure that if the cake on the top squishes out, the filling doesn't come out, but rather icing comes out, so that way it doesn't mess up the outside of our cake. Alright, so we're going to add our cooled pineapple filling. And we're just going to push it all the way to the edge. Probably won't need all of it. Probably need maybe like a little, like what, a quarter of a cup less. This is kind of full. All right, so take your next layer, slide it on top. All right, so you want to go ahead and soak this layer with the coconut simple syrup as well. Now, of course, this is optional. If you don't want to use it, you don't feel like you have to. And feel free to flavor it with whatever you want. If you want to flavor it with vanilla to bring out the vanilla flavor, then go ahead and do that as well. Or you can use dark rum. Dark rum would taste pretty good too. And once you're finished using the simple syrup, if you have anything left over, just refrigerate it, and then you can use it for tea, iced tea, or whatever for sweetening later. It's really great for that. All right, so the first step to icing our cake, once we have the simple syrup in, is we want to cover the top. So take a good amount of your buttercream. Cover the top of the cake. And just kind of work the top of the cake. Pushing the icing all the way to the edge, all the way to the edge. Then you want to start putting the icing onto the sides of the cake. Take some buttercream, put it on your spatula. I'm using a large offset spatula. Feel free to use whatever size you feel comfortable with. And just kind of push it along the edge of the cake. Then to make the sides of your cake really, really smooth, take a bench scraper, a metal bench scraper. You can find these at Target or any baking supply store. And you want to hold it against the cake using the cardboard as a guideline and kind of smooth out the icing. Hold your bench scraper really still. And that should be all you need to do. Now, if you need to go back a couple times, that's fine. I mean, it's never always perfect. Sometimes your hand does move even if you don't want it to. Don't worry about getting the sides super perfectly smooth on this cake because we'll be covering it up with some coconut, some of the toasted coconut we used earlier. So don't be too particular about it. I'm starting to take off a little bit too much because I'm starting to see the side of my cake. That's okay. We do want to make sure, though, that the top of our cake is pretty smooth because we're going to be using a stencil on it with some freeze-dried strawberries, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So that ring that formed along the edge of the side of your cake, go ahead and just push it to the center of your cake. If you have any parts that are kind of low for some reason, put some buttercream on it and just go back with your bench scraper and push it back up again like a ring, and then it will kind of fill itself in. Alright, so we have our toasted coconut. Remember that I toasted it in the oven at 350 to 400 degrees, and every like 3 to 5 minutes I gave it a good stir with an oven-safe spatula, rubber spatula or wooden spoon or whatnot, and you're going to get mixes of pieces that are toasted and brown and pieces that are just white. That's fine. It's actually, you're kind of pushing it on the burnt side if it's all really brown. So don't feel that you have to make it all brown for it to look toasted. This is perfectly nice looking. So take a handful of coconut and kind of push it against your cake in a half moon shape. And then go around the edges of your cake all the way around. And kind of just bang on the bottom of your cardboard to kind of release some of the excess coconut. Alright, and then when you finish, you should kind of have like this bouncing kind of half moon shape around your cake. Sometimes it's not really easy to see with the coconut just because it's all grated and shredded and all over the place. But if you use desiccated coconut, for example, you can get a much more defined half moon shape. But I like to use the regular shredded coconut because it gives your cake a nice character and kind of makes it like 3D and jump out at you. It doesn't look as professional in terms of like perfection, but it does give it a nice home style look to it. So this is it for decorating, except for the rosettes and the stencil on top. But before we put the stencil on top, we have to make sure that the icing is nice and set up, because the stencil will stick to the cake and ruin the top of your icing. So put it in the refrigerator, and we'll let it refrigerate until it's nice and firm, and then it may take up to an hour for it to get that way. Okay, so the next step is we need to make our own strawberry powder. And to do that, I'm going to use some freeze-dried strawberries. I bought mine online at Nuts Online, but you should be able to find yours in like a hiking store, like REI, an outdoor store, or maybe even Trader Joe's. I heard they might carry some freeze-dried stuff, and you want to make sure it's freeze-dried. Regular dried or dehydrated fruit are still kind of gummy, and it won't work. You need something that can be pulverized into dust, basically. And we're going to go ahead and use our coffee grinder. And I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but I actually saw this mentioned in Rachel Ray magazine, where a chef, instead of using sauce, uses different kinds of fruit powders and stuff like that for his desserts. And I was immediately drawn to it because it reminded me of the strawberry powder that my chefs used in school. And my chefs were always like, well, it's really expensive to get. It's very hard to get as an individual rather than a business. And so I was like, well, I'll probably never ever get to use it again. But now that I've learned how to make my own, it works really well. So take some of your freeze-dried strawberries and put it into the coffee grinder. And freeze-dried strawberries is basically the same thing they use in cereal, too. So it's nothing unusual, really. It's just difficult to find on its own. Go ahead and grind that up. Okay, and we'll go ahead and pour it into our sieve. And I'm just going to repeat until all of my strawberries are used up. Alright, so once you have all of your strawberries pulverized, or however many you want to use pulverized, you want to go ahead and sift it through a fine sifter to get out some of those big chunks, as well as some of the seeds. And whatever is left over, you can pulverize again, or you can just throw out, depending on how many chunks of strawberries are in there versus seeds. Because you don't really want to use strawberry seeds if you don't need to. And we actually got quite a bit of powder. Alright, and then next you want to get some maraschino cherries ready. Just pat them dry so they're not wet on the outside. And now we can go ahead and finish our cake. Alright, so once your icing is nice and firm, about an hour in the refrigerator, go ahead and place your stencil. Now I made my own stencil. I'll have this image available for you to download. You're going to have to cut it out, obviously, with an X-Acto knife. But it's just basically a silhouette of what a piña colada should be served in, I guess, a glass, with a little umbrella and a pineapple wedge. So once your icing is nice and firmed up, you can put your stencil right on top. Now, if you can't find freeze-dried strawberries to make your own strawberries, or your own strawberry powder, that's fine. You can use desiccated coconut, basically pulverized coconut, dry coconut, or cocoa powder, or whatever your fancy is, or you don't have to use it at all. Just doing it to make it look a little bit fancier. Go ahead and cover the stencil with the strawberry powder. And there's your finished stencil. Now my icing apparently was still a little sticky towards the center of the cake, which I didn't touch, but we can touch that up very easily. So you can see it's very important to make sure that your icing is completely set up. We're going to pipe 10 rosettes, which denotes that there should be about 10 slices of cake to serve. So we'll start on either side. Now for a rosette, you kind of just want to draw an E. So you kind of just want to go in a spiral and then spiral E, so out like that, and then kind of build on top of it again to make it a little bit taller. Just like that. Now we need to have 4 more on each side. And then we'll take our maraschino cherries and put them right into our buttercream rosettes. And with that, our Piña Colada cake is finished. Alright, so that's the Piña Colada cake. And like I said, feel free to use whatever kind of powder if you want for the stencil. And remember, for the stencil, you need to cut it out with an X-Acto knife, or if you can find a plastic one available at like Michael's or some craft store, you can use that as well. Just make sure your icing is nice and firm. Remember that mine was in the refrigerator for an hour and it still wasn't firm enough, at least in the center. On the sides it was, which makes sense, but just remember that it needs to be nice and firm so it doesn't stick to your stencil. If it does a little bit, you can go back with a small offset spatula and kind of do a little patch job here and there. And feel free to use something other than maraschino cherries around the edge of it. Obviously maraschino cherries are very popular with cocktails. You can use pineapple wedges. If you don't cut off the skin, it looks really nice. And you can also use strawberries to go along with the strawberry powder, or just a tropical feeling. I know the strawberries aren't really tropical, but for some reason, whenever I eat them, I think tropical. I don't know. Maybe that's just because I have them in smoothies with pineapple all the time. But anyway, I hope you learned a lot today. Thanks for watching, and remember, the Aubergine Chef, demystifying dessert one recipe at a time.